reading Frederick Douglass together in Wellesley. My name's Lori Janik, and first I want to acknowledge that this event was funded by Mass Humanities and Mass Cultural Council. There's more information on those groups on the back of your program. It really did take a community to put this together. I would like to thank the committee that put on reading Frederick Douglass together, and especially the Justice and Action Ministry team at the Hills Church. The Wellesley Books and Wellesley Free Library put on a display of Frederick Douglass material and also promoted the event. Thanks to the jazz combo from the Wellesley High School. And of course, thanks to our readers who, with maybe just a few blips, will get all the way through it. We're honored to have Senator Cream and Representative Alice Pike here. And they both have a few words they'd like to share with you.
Thank you. I'm honored to join you today. I'm Senator Cream. I'm sure you know which of us is which, but in any event. This is a great event for this special reading for Frederick Douglass. Thank you to the Mass Humanities, and made possible by such a remarkable coalition. I'm speaking and leaving because I don't want to be political, but I'm hosting an event for Representative Pappas, who's running for the open seat in New Hampshire, and I think it's important that we focus on getting our democracy back. I want to begin by recognizing the organization and partners who came together to make today happen. Representatives from houses of worship, the Wellesley Free Library, the Wellesley Historical Society, Wellesley Public Schools, the League of Women Voters, and the World of Wellesley. The fact that so many corners of our community are united in the effort says something powerful about who we are and what we value. And it's especially meaningful that we are gathering on February 1st because we are not only here to honor Frederick Douglass, we're also beginning Black History Month together as a community. Frederick Douglass's life and words remind us that history is not something we simply learn. It is something we choose to remember and carry forward. Last year, I was proud to vote as a member of the Massachusetts Senator to install a bust of Frederick Douglass in the Senate chamber. That was very meaningful. It was the first time a bust of a person of color was installed in the chamber, and how meaningful it was that it was Frederick Douglass. That was an important step in ensuring that the story of our Commonwealth is fully told, and that truthfully, with Black history, we recognize not as a footnote, but as a central part of who we are. What made that moment especially meaningful was hearing from Frederick Douglass's great-great-great-grandson and their family, who came to the Senate and shared with us that they were honored and humbled by the tribute. It was a powerful reminder that these aren't just symbols in a building. They represent real lives, real legacies, and generations of courage that still are around to shape our Commonwealth. Douglass lived, worked, and organized here in Massachusetts. This is where he found freedom, where he built community, and where he amplified his voice, one that still challenges us to confront justice, defend democracy, and keep pushing a more honest and humane society, no matter what's happening around the world. There's a quote from Frederick Douglass displayed in the Senate chamber, and this is the only quote enshrined on the walls of the chamber. It reads, "Truth, justice, liberty, and humanity will ultimately prevail." Those words are not only inspiring, they are also a call to action. This is hard because it's crooked. Oh, great. Great, thank you. So today, as we listen and reflect, I hope we take a moment to consider what it means to live up to those ideals, not just in our government, which I hope we do, but in our schools, our neighborhoods, and our everyday choices. Thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for ensuring that Frederick Douglass' legacy continues to be remembered right here in Wellesley and across the Commonwealth. Now we'll hear from my wonderful colleague, Representative Pike.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the organizers of today's event for inviting me to say a few words this afternoon, and I emphasize a few. I would also like to thank everyone. I'm going to expand a little bit on the people that Cindy has already acknowledged, but Reverend Jonathan Page for the use of the Wellesley Hills Congregational Church, Jim Klockenberg for what I'm sure will be very inspiring historical remarks, the Wellesley Jazz Band, and of course, Wellesley High School Jazz Band, and of course, all of the speakers without whom this event would not occur. The Mass Humanities, which has already been acknowledged as a sponsor of this event, receives a significant portion of its funding from the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency whose budget Senator Cream and I have always supported, but rarely have had the opportunity to actually see the impact in person. So I'm especially excited to see something of this nature sponsored by Mass Humanities happening here in Wellesley. And at this particular moment in our history, I think it's critical that their mission continue. Which is the sharing, one of its missions is sharing the stories of the diverse peoples who have contributed to the history of the Commonwealth. Contrary to what some others have been saying in recent months, I don't think diversity is a bad word, and I think we need to continue to acknowledge and support all of the diverse communities that we have in this Commonwealth. So today's reading is one of the most famous speeches of Frederick Douglass, and is a great example of the type of work that Mass Humanities and similar organizations must continue. I look forward to the performance, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When we began planning this event, we chose February 1st, as a great way to start Black History Month, and also because Frederick Douglass celebrated his birthday in February. You're going to learn a lot more about Frederick Douglass, this speech, and other things from our introductory speaker. And the person who better to introduce our introductory speaker is Reverend Jonathan Page.
Thank you, Lauren. So hello and welcome. My name is, again, Jonathan Page. I'm the senior minister here at the Wellesley Hills Congregational Church, and we're delighted to host all of you here. And thank you, Lori and Mary and others who've put in so much effort to make this event happen. So I have the great privilege of introducing our next speaker, the person to give the historical background to the speech. And that is Professor James Kloppenberg, the Charles Warren Research Professor at Harvard University. Now, this is a particular delight because Jim was one of my professors when I was an undergrad at Harvard. And so when I was there, his class, History of 1661, that I took was one of the highest rated classes anywhere around. It was a class that almost every history major took, and it was brutal. It was a survey of modern American intellectual history. So every major American thinker from the end of the Civil War to the present day, we read them all, or at least a lot of them. It felt like we read them all. And it's a credit to Jim and his teaching and the care he has for his subject that in spite of the intense workload, the students kept coming back. Because the course is one of those ones that made you think deeply about what it means to be an American, a human being, all the best things that education should do. If, by the way, you woke up this morning and you're like, gosh, I really want to know a lot about the history of American pragmatism and William James, that's the man you should talk to about it. And more recently, writing books on, for instance, putting Barack Obama in this long tradition of American intellectual history, or what we do with democracy today, and how our American democratic system has evolved. And so right now we get to hear his wisdom and erudition as he gives us background into the life and work of Frederick Douglass and this particular speech. So it is a privilege to introduce Professor James Kloppenberg.
Thanks, John, for that very generous introduction. I've known John for such a long time. Is this on? It won't come up any higher, I guess. All right, I'll speak loudly. I've known John for such a long time that when we first met, his hair was dark and I had hair. So thank you, John. Thank you, Lori, for inviting me. Thank you, Pam Stewart, for suggesting me to Lori, and thanks to all of you for being here. You've gathered to hear the words of Frederick Douglass, not to listen to me, so I'm going to keep these remarks brief. It should be around 12 minutes or so. I'll offer some biography, some political context, and some reflections on how the speech relates to some persistent issues in our nation. In the speech we're reading, Douglass said, "We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and the future." I think he was right. That is why we care about the past. We're here today not just to honor Douglass, as important as that is, but also to make the past useful to the present. I've been studying, teaching, and writing about democracy for 50 years, and I think the threat to American democracy today is as great as it has been at any time since the 1850s. Reading this speech today should help remind us of our obligations in 2026. If you don't see the parallels between Douglass's speech and what's happening today, I urge you to watch the YouTube video of Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar speaking after the murders of Renee Good and Alex Petty in Minneapolis. Frederick Douglass stands with Abraham Lincoln as one of the most important figures in 19th century U.S. history. He wrote 3 autobiographies, increasingly militant, and his books sold tens of thousands of copies. He was widely praised as the greatest orator that most of his listeners had ever heard. He was the subject of more than 160 photographic portraits, making him the single most photographed person in the 19th century, and it's not even close to anybody else. Douglass was among the first to grasp the special power of the camera, of the visual. He always insisted on being photographed in formal dress, usually facing the camera head on, and with a serious rather than a smiling countenance, as in the portrait on the flyer for this event. He knew that most white people had trouble seeing any black person as worthy of respect, and the formality he projected in those portraits was a deliberate challenge to the prevailing racial stereotypes of the 19th century. First, some biography. He was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey around 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. He died of a heart attack on February 20th, 1895 at his home in Washington, D.C. The surname Douglass dates from 1838, after he had escaped from slavery to the North and made a life for himself as a free man in New Bedford, here in Massachusetts. There, Douglass became acquainted with white and black anti-slavery activists who encouraged him to tell his story. In 1841, Douglass spoke at an anti-slavery gathering on Nantucket. In the audience was the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, editor of the most widely circulated anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator, which Douglass had been reading since he arrived in New Bedford. Douglass's speech so impressed Garrison that he encouraged Douglass to write a narrative of his life. When Douglass's autobiography was published in 1845, it sold more than 30,000 copies, which is an extraordinary number for any writer at that time. The speech we're reading today was delivered in 1852 in the Grand Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York, which was one of the hotbeds of the anti-slavery sentiment. That's 7 years after Douglass's first autobiography appeared, and just 9 years before the start of the Civil War. Some historical context is necessary to understand this speech. In the 1850 Compromise, which was on the minds of everyone in Douglass's audience, was a legislative hodgepodge that admitted California as a free state to the Union, but also included as a sop to the slave states the Fugitive Slave Law. That law required any formerly enslaved people who had escaped bondage and made their way to the North to be returned to their masters in the South. All northern states had abolished slavery long before the 1850s, and many people in the North, white and black, were outraged. The Fugitive Slave Law made criminals not only the free blacks who had managed to escape slavery, but anyone who helped formerly enslaved people escape or even remain free. Fear drove around 20,000 free blacks to leave the U.S. for Canada. So not only was Douglass himself at risk when he gave this speech in 1852, so were all those who helped him and everyone who listened to him give this speech. I think we should keep that in mind. The Fugitive Slave Law galvanized anti-slavery sentiment even more than the books written by Douglass and other formerly enslaved people, such as David Walker and Harriet Jacobs. More than 200 of these slave narratives have survived. If you're wondering what it was like to be enslaved, you could read any of those, or you could watch the 2013 film, 12 Years a Slave. It's based on the account by Solomon Northrop, a free black man who was kidnapped and sold into slavery, and it will give you some idea just how horrific slavery was. The only book that rivaled the impact of Douglass's autobiography was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel that was published in the same year that Douglass delivered the speech we're reading today. The only speeches that were as influential as those of Douglass were those of the young Abraham Lincoln, who seems not to have been familiar with Douglass at the time, but whose speeches echoed themes Douglass developed in his speeches and writings. During Lincoln's presidency, the two men became close associates, and it's no exaggeration to say that Douglass influenced Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which ended slavery, but only in the Confederate States. In the speech we're reading, Douglass deploys the rhetorical arsenal of Hebrew prophets such as Isaiah, Ezekiel, and especially Jeremiah, calling on God to rescue his people and calling on his people to heed God's word. Douglass's speech has 4 parts. The first focuses on the Declaration of Independence. The second describes the horrors of slavery. The third, the longest and most powerful part, targets the Fugitive Slave Law, and the speech closes with a surprising affirmation of hope. Douglass begins by reminding his listeners that the United States was established by people who refused to accept oppression as legitimate and injustice as inevitable. They challenged British rule by putting their love of country, the public good, above their own private interests. Douglass was asking his listeners, and he is asking us to do just that, to value justice and the public interest above our narrow individual interests. In part 2 of the speech, Douglass points out the gulf separating the citizenship white Americans enjoy from the condition of all black Americans, free or enslaved. In the southern states, it was illegal to teach enslaved people to read, and Douglass knew why. His master's wife began teaching Douglass to read, and after his master stopped it, Douglass taught himself. Only when he could read the Bible did he begin to see the injustice of slavery and its utter inconsistency with Christian principles. Douglass condemns slavery in the name of humanity, liberty, the Constitution, and the Bible. He quotes the defiant lines that Garrison used in The Liberator: "I will not equivocate, I will not excuse." He makes the same point that Lincoln made: since nobody ever imagines that slavery is acceptable for himself, neither should anyone think that it is acceptable for any human beings simply because of the color of their skin. We now know that all people are descended from the first human beings in southern Africa, and that the genetic makeup of all humans is 99% the same. We understand that race is not a biological fact, but only a cultural construct. Yet we also know that racism is as real and as poisonous in 2026 as it was in 1852. When race-based slavery is allowed to persist, Douglass says, and when families can be ripped apart because slaves can be sold to the highest bidder, all talk of liberty and equality is, in his words, nothing but fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. In part 3, Douglass directs his fire toward the fugitive slave law. Imagine, he asks his audience, if you were hunted down, put in chains, and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Officers of the law were being paid to kidnap and enslave even those whom Douglass calls the most exemplary and defenseless people. That glaring violation of justice, he says, stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation. Of course, today in 2026, we must ask ourselves if it still stands alone. Douglass observed correctly that the United States in his day continued to invite immigrants from other countries. In the 1840s and 1850s, no laws barred entry to this nation. That explains how I, and I suppose many of you here, happen to be in the United States. Americans in the 1850s identified with the cause of freedom in Hungary, in France, in Ireland. They acknowledged, Douglass says, God's command that all men everywhere love one another. Yet they were now being required by law to assist those empowered to hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill fugitives. Although Douglass admired white abolitionists, he disagreed with Garrison's claim that the Constitution authorized slavery. Garrison argued that the North should secede from the South because of slavery. In our own day, some people say that the United States is a nation built on slavery, and it always will be devoted to white supremacy, rather than equality across the color line. Douglass disagreed. Instead, he insisted accurately that there is not a single word in the Constitution that defends or authorizes slavery. The challenge facing Americans was then what it is now, simply to live up to the principles established in our nation's founding documents, the principles of liberty and justice for all. Despite his bitter denunciations of slavery and the fugitive slave law, which drove him to endorse violence, finally, as a means to end it, Douglass refused to despair. That's important. Think of all the times when Douglass could have given up hope and did not. He was born and lived 20 years enslaved. After he escaped at last, the fugitive slave law threatened his freedom. Despite Douglass's best efforts, President Lincoln refused to end slavery throughout the nation during the Civil War. When Reconstruction ended in 1877, the nation abandoned Black Americans and empowered former slaveholders. And finally, the rigid, dehumanizing rules of Jim Crow segregation took hold during the last years of Douglass's life. Despite all that, Douglass never abandoned hope. If he did not despair, neither should we. Remember that Douglass concludes this speech on a note of hope. Americans have it in their power, he says, to respect the principle of human brotherhood and put an end to slavery. But that will not happen automatically, he says. Americans must act to end injustice. So must we.
Mr. President, friends and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people in which you now glory was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government. England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need to say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers, feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government. Your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn, yet they persevered.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we at this distance of time regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful, but amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and united independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles, be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, at whatever cost.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man who it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household words. They form the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to others.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, an important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us?
Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the state of the case. I see it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I'm not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated Temple of Liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were an inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with a popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world.
My subject, then fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the greatest sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not bounded by prejudice or is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light?
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholder themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of the law for the government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 22 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by the black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crime would subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls in the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, when the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
Is it not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that we are all engaged in a manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, that we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and augmentation, as matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How would I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberties, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them like dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments of my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him more mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of slaves.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world. Search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men was never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of the Confederacy. The trade is one of the peculiarities of the American institutions. In several states, this trade is the chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert it from the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy and as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and the laws of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much exertion is poured out upon Americans, upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states passes without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics, and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all of our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market in New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit the purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and the blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There see the old man with locks, thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The droves move tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly, you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank, and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child, and her chains, that gash on her shoulder, tells her to move on.
Follow this drove to New Orleans, attend the auction, see men examined like horses, see the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States.
I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number has been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chained gangs that passed our door.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight.
But a still more inhuman, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has become obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coexistent, extensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children, dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
For black men, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He could bring no witness for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans,
Your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina.
You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty.
You shed tears over fallen Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth.
It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it. And yet, you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
But it is answered in reply to all this that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least, so I believe. And others have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I this day presented, the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work for the downfall of slavery. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, all God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe.
feel bad for stopping them from playing, and they'll play some more. I just wanted to thank everybody for your participation, your attendance, and I hope this is a meaningful start to your Black History Month. Thank you.